Bam! MC is in the house. What's going on, folks? My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I'm here every week on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Standard Time, picking a topic, deep diving, exploring it, having some fun while doing it. For those of you that are watching this later on, make sure you are checking the description down below. Right now I'm streaming on Facebook, on YouTube, on X. And X, I don't think there's a description, but YouTube and Facebook, there certainly is. And the reason I want you to check the description is because I have a free email newsletter. And you can go there, you can sign up. Just for signing up, I'm also going to give you a free program, and it's a balance management program. It's sort of like time management meets a balanced, functional man. And it's a framework that I use on a daily basis, sort of organizing what it is that I'm supposed to be doing from day to day and not losing everything that matters to me in the process, right? So that program is called Master the 24-Hour Cycle, and it is yours for free. Now, you might be saying, well, if it's for free, how useful can it be? How valuable could it be? And I would say, well, for a long time, I sold that program for $47. It is the codified version of what I do on a daily basis. It has changed a tremendous number of people's ability to organize themselves. And the reason I hand it out for free is because you guys will wind up getting on my email newsletter as a result of it, which allows me to talk to you about different things. And let's be, transparent here. Some of you guys may even find something that I'm doing in the world of business that you think resonates with you and that could help you. And so by me offering this stuff out there to the people who follow my stuff, every once in a while, there'll be somebody in and amongst that group that'll do business with me at a higher level. So it is a way of just finding a way to generate alliances, which is something I talk about a great deal, right? So all that being said, what's up, Jesse? Johnny Groove, what's up, brother man? Good to see you guys. If you guys are watching on Facebook or YouTube, do me a favor, give me a shout here. Let me see that you are in the house. I'll be honest, I do like that I see a lot of the usual suspects hanging out. And there you go. Corey is another one who's usually hanging out with us on Wednesdays. So please feel free to do that. Let's get into the topic of the day. Okay, the cost of pretending. The cost of pretending. Frank the Killer, what's up, brother man? Good to see you. The motivation for today's talk is a conversation that I had a few days ago with a coaching student where I was explaining to him that we do not have an endless amount of energy. Whether it's from moment to moment, we could say in totality, the energy arc of our lives, we could say this in a different application. But whatever scale we're looking at our energy at, or whatever lens we're looking at it through, we have to understand that there's not an unlimited supply. So the individual I was talking to, he was mentioning a job that he had. Now, he is an entrepreneur. He owns a business, and this one particular job that he had, meaning he had a client that he was doing business with, he was saying that, he was complaining basically that this guy wasn't doing this, he wasn't doing that. And my reaction usually is, well, can you afford to get rid of him? Can you cover all your bases and, sustain yourself and all those different things if we fired this client? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, why don't you do that then? And his response was something to the effect of, well, I'm not in the habit of saying no to money. I said, okay. That's how prostitutes talk, by the way, but okay. You're not in the habit of saying no to money. So what is the value of money? We went down this rabbit hole of, well, money's a good thing. You're holding it in high regard. What exactly does money represent to you? And his answers really stemmed around, well, the things you could do with money, which kind of makes sense. There wasn't any, trick to me asking these questions. But at some point I asked him, and what does it cost you to make that money with this particular client, using this client as an example. And he didn't understand that question. He didn't understand the context that I was like, what do you mean cost me? And he said, well, I got to do the service that I'm hired to do. I said, well, what else does it cost you? And again, he didn't understand. And I said, well, you have more than one client, right? Yeah, I got a whole collection of clients. I said, and this service that you do this service for all of them. Yeah. I said, the fact that you don't like this client, when you leave after dealing with him, what do you feel like? He's like, I'm usually pissed off. I'm usually, high state or low state. Oh, I'm usually in a low state. I said, all right. Do you have any clients that you really like? Oh, yeah, there's this one guy, great guy. He and I are always joking around. I got a lot in common. I said, when you leave dealing, with him, how do you feel? And he goes, well, obviously I feel a lot, I feel good. I feel happy and, high state, functional state and everything. And I said, so this guy is costing you something that the other guy isn't. It's not just delivering a service to something else. And he started understanding what I was articulating, and it culminated in me, telling him the cost that he was paying is the name of today's talk here. It was the cost of pretending. So, Yarn Saxa, what's up, darling? Good to see you. If you guys have read Tribalnomics, and you should have, if you haven't, you can go down into the description, and there should be an order link there. Short read, I think well worth it. Although, admittedly, I'm a little biased. But if you've read my book, Tribalnomics, I talk about identities, and I use the visual of a circle, right? And the circle is the wall of self. Inside that wall resides the identity. Now, it could be the identity of an individual. It could be the identity of a group. It could be a family. It could be 5 people stuck in an elevator. It could be New York Giants fans. It could be whatever the group it could be. But then there's also at the individual scale, each individual, Harry, Mike, Sally, Billy, et cetera, et cetera. Well, whenever we are going to make an alliance, we understand that there is one identity and another identity agreeing to overlap. And where that overlap resides lies the alliance. Well, in order to maintain an alliance, we need to basically be the person we promised to be in this alliance, so that the other person feels that they're going to continue to get the reward for being in the alliance in the first place. Getting away from the abstract, which should get a little confusing, let's just use examples to illustrate this. If I am, and I'm not going to use my client's business, but let's say I am a house painter, and I am hired by Mike to paint his house. Mike expects me to finish the paint job that he wanted done on his house, as I promised to do it for him, as he described that he wanted it done. And I, on the other hand, expect, number one, there not to be any more walls in his house than we agreed to, right? He doesn't say, oh, no, the rest of the house is behind the woods, and there's a huge mansion back there, right? So I expect, in order for him to keep up his end of the bargain, he is not only going to present the thing that I agreed to paint, but he's also going to pay me for the service on the agreed upon, amount that he's going to do that. So I have my end of my obligations, and the person fulfilling that obligations within the context of this alliance is my identity to him, and vice versa. Who he is what he obligated himself to be to me. As long as I'm being the guy that I said I'm going to be, he's being the guy that he said to be, then we have an alliance that is functional, that produces that reward, that return on our each individual investments to the alliance. Well, back to my client now, who had this client, right, who he couldn't stand. And I talked about continuously paying the cost of pretending. When we are doing something that is so offset from who we naturally are, we have to pretend in order to maintain a level of function. If you've ever had a boss that you cannot stand, but you could not let that boss find out that you could not stand them, then you understand the sort of facade that we are required to create when we are in these types of situations. So talking to my coaching student about the cost of pretending that he had with his client, when I told him that he needed or he should fire this client, and I even explained to him the cost of pretending, this idea of having offset in an obligation, accruing a cost over time, and usually measured in units of energy, right? We wind up just burnt out, exhausted, fatigued, lethargic, whatever it is. There's a cost to pretending. I explained all to him, and he said, well, I understand, but, I could suck it up and still deal with it because the money's good. To which I said, well, that's fine. Listen, one of the things as a coach that I do with my coaching students is I never tell people what to do. I just, put the spotlight, on the shadows that they're hiding in, or some of the things that they are hiding in. Sometimes I put a mirror in front of them, and sometimes the mirror they don't want to look at, but I don't tell anybody what to do. So I said, that's fine. I said, well, is it sustainable? This idea of I will continue to do business with people that make me feel less of who I am, that incur this cost. And he said, yeah, it's sustainable. And I said, well, how many of those guys can you handle at one time? How many of those types of clients? And, he's like, I don't know, and I'm paraphrasing our conversation to some extent, but his idea was he didn't think it was something that he even had to pay attention to where I said, well, if you are not paying attention to the obligations that you're making, where some of them are overlapped significantly with you, whereas others are offset significantly from who you are, then how are you ever going to develop a system that brings you more of one type than another? In other words, my coaching student up until that point didn't really either realize or at least take ownership of what in this process he had control over. So now what is the value to you guys who are listening to this talk right now? I'm talking about a lot of factors. Some of you guys may say, well, I don't own a fucking business, or I don't have, or I hate all my bosses and I always have, and I'm fine. What's the big deal? I would say that it really comes down to, if we're looking to optimize our efforts, there is something to be said for what is the criteria by which we consider something to be optimized. Too many times, and I think this is probably the point of this, too many times in society today, it's optimized if you're making more money. And that is not the way to optimize your life. That is certainly a variable to be considered. I've said before, you guys have heard me say during these talks, in life, in a balanced life, a functional life, there is a minimal functional budget, right? Like, yeah, you need to make a certain amount of money in order to be autonomous in this day and age. That goes without saying. But if we think optimization resides completely in our ability to make more money, then we are losing the game here. I would say a good North Star, a good orienting force when trying to determine if we are in fact on the road to optimizing our life is how much of my life am I allowed to be me and still generate the synergy of the alliances I'm connected to. Looking at it from the opposite end, what proportion of my life is me pretending to be somebody else in order to maintain function? And I would say that if it is sustainable, if you find it to be sustainable, then understand the cost of that sustainability is a lower total outcome. There are some, there's a phrase that's used in economics, the cost of living, right? And the cost of living in one place could be astronomically higher than the cost of living in another place. And what they're really saying is, in those places, you could have relative the same at the same level of living, the same, I guess, level of experience in those two locations, but one's going to cost a lot more in the unit of money than the other. And I would say, if you're somebody that lives your life where you are accepting the cost of pretending in the roles that you're connected to, chances are the level of your living, if there's a cost of living, the level is going to be reduced to the cost that you could pay. In other words, you will be capable of more if you find a way to be productive while simultaneously being who you are than you will just finding a way to pretend long enough to maintain these alliances that get you what you need. I'll give you an example. This literally happened just yesterday. At my headquarters location, there is a leak. Some pipe is leaking in an adjacent basement to where, my location is. So there is a condominium organization that manages all these properties, and this thing has been forever. It's the Parkchester section of the Bronx, if you guys are familiar. And my manager contacted the POC, the point of contact with the administration, the management company, to get the ball rolling on, hey, there's water coming in from next door in the basement. And I think 3 people came through to look at it and basically say, I'm gonna call and get somebody down here. Sometime later, somebody else will show up and go, this is definitely not what we thought. But my shift is ending, so I'll notify the next shift guy. And then the next guy came in and say, well, I haven't gotten any paperwork to determine whether this is residential or commercial. So I don't know what part of our, and this is the game, right? This is the bureaucracy. These are all the people that are willing to reduce their level of output to a game that keeps them at that level of living. So what do I mean? My manager and I, manager of my school and I, were laughing yesterday because he made the observation. He's like, these guys, they all love their jobs. And they love their jobs because they could be so inefficient, so inauthentic. They could just basically maintain such a low level of their total capabilities, and they're completely happy about it. They love their jobs because they don't really have to do anything. And they get to take breaks. They get to hang out. They get to, everybody's got their hustles going on the side, whatever they happen to be. And I'm not incriminating anybody here. But, like I remember my father, he was in the 1199 union back in the 80s growing up. And I remember one time he used to take me to work. Right. And at the time, I'm 10 years old, 8 years old, sometime between then. I was born in 75. So you figure mid 80s, around 10 years old. He would take me to work. And I loved going to work with him. He was a night mechanic, like an engineer in an HVAC, engineering department at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. And I might be putting him on blast right now. This never gets back. But one of the things I loved was I used to go with him. He used to work 12 to 8s, right? Was it 12 to 8s? Maybe. Something like that. But basically, he worked overnight. And when he would take me, we would go. They had this secret room hidden in one of like the industrial machine floors or something where they had a ping pong table. And these guys on a night shift would play ping pong all night. And, I guess it could be worse in terms of hobbies that they all had. But they would just play, and everything was just, the game was just don't get in trouble. It's like their job was don't get fired because it was fairly secure. It was union. I remember eventually, they went on strike at some point. And I remember standing on the picket lines with my dad because he had to go and stand like the rest of them out there. And then eventually my father got promoted to management. He was no longer union. And there was another strike. I believe there was another strike. And I wasn't privy to this. I was a little older. But I remember the feedback getting from my father, just how frustrated he was. And both when he was in the union and looking at these people, like he couldn't understand. My father came from an upbringing where it's like, why aren't we working? We should all be working. Why is everybody fucking complaining? Just work. But then he went to management, and then it was, why are they not working? And it wasn't really costing him the same way that when he was in the union, but he just had this contempt for people who just didn't want to do their best to climb. But I think it is also somewhat indicative of how I was influenced by my father, that I also don't understand what it's like to settle. And I think maybe that's a good way to put a label on a lot of this that I'm talking about. It's settling. Like, what happens when you find a way to reduce the pressure of the offset of your ecosystem to where it's sustainable? In other words, the cost of pretending is a cost you could afford. And you just say, I'm going to tread water here for the rest of my life. Looking at those guys that are part of that management company where my school is, it's like you could see that these guys aren't bad guys. They're good guys. They're funny guys. They're engaging guys. Like they're guys that have a good energy about them. But they're also guys that you could tell have settled. They're saying, you know what, I'm going to do this. Like, I've never entered a situation where I was comfortable saying, yeah, I'm going to do this for the next 20 years. It's like 20 years. Am I making a decision for me 5, 10, 15 years from now? Am I putting that version of me in a box right now saying I'm going to do this for 20 years? It's not how I operate. One of the things, though, it's funny because I just got a bunch of testimonials from guys in my group, in my coaching group, and it's I find it amusing, obviously, that these guys, just incredible feedback they've given me, and it makes me feel good that I'm helping these guys, and I've gotten them the results that they talk about in the testimonials. But then it's funny because I look at these other guys that I've interacted with over the years, not people that are in my groups, but people that I've come into contact with, who say I'm like the Antichrist. I'm the second coming of the Antichrist, or whatever the fucking terminology is. Like, I'm just the lowest of the low, and it's like, yeah, that's what happens. Because I'll use those guys those guys that are part of the management company. There's a reason I have my manager dealing with them, because these guys, nice guys, funny guys, engaging guys, at some point I cannot stand in front of them and go, so this is all you're going to do with your life? It is a compulsion. And the thing is, I refuse to pretend. One of the guys that just gave me a testimonial, I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to hook him up into anything with this, but he just gave me a testimonial recently, last couple of days. And I remember sitting with him and a friend of his, and we had this idea about starting a business. This is, I'm not even going to say where, but another part of the country. We're going to start a business. And it was me, him, and his buddy. And we went, and I flew in, for the day to have this meeting, and we sat down and had a conversation about all these things. And I thought the meeting went really well. And at the end of it, or at the end of the day, I go home and my buddy contacted me. So I'm like, oh, so what'd your buddy think? Where's his head at? And he's like, yeah, he said he doesn't want to do it. So I'm like, really? I'm like, I thought the meeting went well, and like, whatever, and I said, what was his reasoning? Did he not think the model would work? And he said, no. He said he just told me, man, like your friend Justin's really, really intense. And that, I guess, pushed him away because he said I was too intense. Oh man, I don't understand it. It's just really like, I don't understand what it's like to pretend from day to day. I would say, if we're looking at, ways to define a valuable life, and we talk about freedom, part of being free is not giving away your power, not giving away your identity. I've described and defined self-power as being able to maintain the integrity of who you are, despite the pressures of your surroundings. You're the same guy on the sunny day that you are on the rainy day. Same guy in the middle of the summer that you are in the depths of the winter. Like, you're always the same guy, and that's a powerful way to be. And there's a freedom when we can maintain that, when we have the ability to maintain that. And I would say, anchoring that or connecting that to what we've been discussing, one of the means by which I've noticed that I've been able to do that in my life to the extent that I have is that I don't design scenarios where I benefit from pretending. I remember I was listening to a Alan Watts talk, and he had a thing about when somebody asks you a question and you sit there and you ponder for a second and then you answer. Alan Watts was asking, who is it that you are trying to pretend to be? That you take this question in and you think about it and you engineer a response. What is basically the criteria that you're using to engineer that response? What is the goal of the end product that you are trying to deliver in the form of that response? And he contrasts that to somebody hearing a joke. And as soon as somebody says something funny, they laugh because that's them. And there's no sort of filter. There's no middleman. There's no pretending process going on. And I've always found that when I put myself in situations where I could just be me, that is when I do my best work. And that's when I build my strongest alliances. I liken that to, or not like it, but I compared that to those times in my life where I had a job and I was always pretending. I've told you guys, I got fired from just about every job I ever had. And one of the biggest reasons was I've always had this issue pretending. And I got to tell you, when you do have an issue pretending and you're in a situation where you have to pretend in order to keep your job, it's not the most comfortable way to be. But any of the costs that I had of being authentic was a very short-term cost. It's just, I see these people in society today, especially with social media, which is just so fucking destructive. Yet here we are on a social media platform watching a live video. You're allowed to watch my stuff still, right? Just everything else get rid of. But the idea of it is, I use an example, like you guys, like some of you guys know me in the real world. Al-Jitsu said, I want to fix that lip. I leak the same day. Who does that? Al-Jitsu, that's why you're the man. Oh, that's awesome. But one of the things that I see in dealing with individuals is they have a relationship with their surroundings. And when they're not around those surroundings, they find the opportunity to finally be who they want to be. Those of you that know me in the real world, know this about me. But for those of you that have never met me in the real world, like there is something to be, dealing with me through social media, through a medium like this live stream that is somewhat insulating, from actually dealing with me, because I've used the example before. Like if you have a booger hanging out of your nose, like, would you want your friend to tell you you have a booger hanging out of your nose? It's like, yeah, by the way, not a very easy conversation to have for either of the parties. I'm the guy that always is pointing it out to people that they got a booger hanging out of their nose, but it might not be that. It might be, so you just going to be that fat like forever, or I see your kid, your son, smart kid, but it looks like he has breasts. Maybe don't give him dessert every day. I'm the guy that instigates those conversations. And again, it is a blessing and a curse, dare I say, but one of the things I will say is that there is nobody that's ever met me that said that I am not the same person. Maybe the nature of our relationships have changed. Like I want to continue to master every aspect of who I am. Like that's one of my goals. And when you look at the collection of habits I have during a given day, some of them are geared towards making money. But I could say comfortably that just about all of them are connected to me being a better version of myself. A man, a husband, a father, a brother, an employer, a coach, mentor, a student in some cases, like I'm always looking to improve those things. And sometimes people are along for the ride for a little while. And then it gets to the point where it's a little bit too hot in the kitchen, so to speak, and they bail. I get it. You got to be you. And I think when we look at the relationships that we have during the course of our days, I would ask you guys to do this on your own. Just assess, audit those relationships and ask yourself, how many of them am I really allowed to be myself? And when I say allowed, I mean in the context of, if I was myself, this alliance would break down. If I was myself, this alliance would be sustainable. It's one of the reasons why family tends to be such an easily designed alliance. A lot of times because they know who you authentically are. So you could be the person who you want to be, and they're still there. Whereas as we start to meet people in our life as adults or professionally, sometimes they'll learn something about you they didn't know, and they're like, oh, I don't want to be connected to this person. And that's just the nature of the alliances. So my whole thing is, why not make alliances that allow you to be authentically you? To which the rebuttal might be, well, yeah, I don't know how to make money just finding a job or some sort of creating a business where I'm just allowed to be me. And I would say, well, you haven't found it yet, right? Because this isn't a dichotomy. This isn't where either you got it or you don't. You haven't found it yet. To which then I would lead to asking you about the process by which you are looking to find it, or you're looking to build it. You could have a 9-to-5 job while building a business on the side. You're not going to be the first person to do that, right? So let me see. We got some questions here. Corey says, what you're talking about as far as worker productivity, especially in relation to unions, is incredibly relevant right now. Unionized domestic shipping is taking a major hit for many reasons. There's a pride that people used to have in their standards, their individual standards, and their standards were not set by the circumstances in which they found themselves. I would say collectively, I'm very comfortable saying that is no longer the case in America. People are going to go to work every day trying to not get fired. I think it was Jim Rohn. Did I quote Jim Rohn already? I'll quote him again because Jim Rohn's the man. He said something to the effect of, when we're setting our mindset, there's a difference between a guy who says, I don't like this job, so I'm not showing up 5 minutes early and I'm not staying 5 minutes late. There's a difference between that guy and the guy who says, I don't care whether I like the job or not. I'm going to show up early and stay late and do the best I can regardless. One has an identity and the standards that go along with that identity that are being dictated to them by their surroundings, which means they're always going to be reduced to the product, to being a product of their circumstances. Whereas the latter example is somebody who has an internally set standard. He has an internal way of orienting his energy and his trajectory of his efforts. And when you're an individual who has been raised in an environment, like when you look at, let me find a good example here. You guys ever remember that show, The Wire, right, on HBO? It's pretty good. One of the seasons they featured all the people in the shipping yards, the stevedores, I think they're called, whatever the name is. And you'll see a bunch of the guys, they were there like for generations. Their grandfather, their father, now them. And it was like a thing of pride, and they had this culture that was surrounded. And again, I don't mean to have a value judgment. I'm just making almost like a sociological observation and say, well, what do you think drives the son to go into the same industry as the dad? Because mind you, it's not like it used to be where you had the master apprentice dynamic where the blacksmith father made the blacksmith son, because they existed as their own entity. These are people who work in an industry, who now the next person works in the industry, generationally also in the same place for another person they're working. It's different. But when you look at that, well, what is it that has allowed one to move into the other? It's a learned behavior. It's a level of set expectations. Well, of course I'm going to do this, because they've never been exposed to the possibility of there being other choices, let alone given the tools to actually create those opportunities that turn into different choices. Right. So it's it's like, yeah, when I look at the guys, again, I'll talk about the guys that work in the management company where my school is. I don't think they're bad people. They're just limited in their utility, because they chose to be, because they've managed to limit their growth. I've never, been okay with saying, oh yeah, I can't wait to do this. And, I'm going to do this for the next 20, 30 years, then retire. And then I don't think like that. Again, it's not a value judgment. There are going to be people who disagree with me because their preferences lead them that down that path. And let me be the first one to say, don't listen to me then, because I don't have one thing more to say about what somebody should be doing than they do. Right. But what I can do is, again, give the spotlight, provide a mirror sometimes, and just say, well, are you actually doing what you claim to want to be doing? Right. Mad Guardian, what up? Corey says, there are people out there making $35, $40 an hour with no ability to actually earn that pay, and the companies are completely changing their operation to remove them. There is, something to be said about the game that has been played by unions for generations, that, for the most part, is going to be coming to an end. I remember, I think in New York City, they mandated like a $15 an hour minimum wage. As soon as they do that, I own a business in New York City. It's like, okay, I guess I'm not hiring anybody. I guess I'm not, hiring the teenage to pay part-time to do something or other, to run flyers. I used to pay people to hand out flyers and postcards and all these different things. I guess I can't do that if we're going to follow the 15, because you have people that have this centralized opinion on what they're going to achieve politically, and they're meddling into the economics and just selling people, these dreams that are not anchored to reality. Well, it's going to be very, realistic when every fast food place maybe has one person working there and everything else is systemized. Not just the ordering, interface like we have in a lot of restaurants now. I can't tell you the last time when I went to a supermarket and had to talk to a cashier. I happen to be somebody that's not looking to talk to people when I go to these places. So for me, it's like it's turning into a dream, where I could just talk to computers all day long and I don't have to deal with people. But think about the people who their entire life. I used this example in my mastermind group a couple of weeks ago. I remember 10, 15 years ago, there were a bunch of services. I forget the name of the services that I used, but for transcription. So if I was teaching a course on whatever, like let's say a jiu-jitsu instructional, I could go and have it transcribed, have the video transcribed, and then print it out, and then offer as another feature or deliverable when somebody bought the course. They could also get the transcription of the actual videos. So if you didn't want to watch it, you could read it, whatever. There's all these transcription services out there, and they were exploding in popularity because there was a need for that transcription service. Just think about where they are now. If they were never tracking the disruptive technology of AI, if they looked at AI in the beginning and were like, oh yeah, they're never going to be able to do what we're doing. We have real people that are, looking, listening, and it's like, you have no idea. And it's easy. I mean, I could sound like a smarty pants now because all these years later, but how many industries out there right now are looking at the thing that will eventually bankrupt them? But because this thing is such a low level, they have absolutely no grasp of what it's going to represent in the future. I read a book, The Innovator's Dilemma. The Innovator's Dilemma. Don't ask me who wrote it. But it was basically a description of what disruptive technology looks like and how bigger companies can navigate, these budding technologies that may be their undoing, and sort of hedge their investments to manage to make a transition if they need to. We got a lot of people right now, employees, that have no such education and they have no such plan. There are people, like, if you think about the people who, and I'll use again these guys that work for the management company, right? These handymen, I guess they are. It's like the thing that they're really, really good at right now is not getting fired. But how they navigate not getting fired is not the same as getting better at the individual skills that they would need to sort of sell themselves on if they were to ever to lose that job. So you have a bunch of individuals that they settle into the environment and they become completely codependent on that environment because they don't continue to grow as an individual. Remember, in the beginning of this talk, I was talking about the wall of self. These individuals never invest in developing who they are, so that if their environment is ripped from them, they're left in a dysfunctional state. Like, listen, anybody could lose a business or lose a job or lose whatever, but how suitable are you at that point to be able to pick up the next thing and keep it going? That is a testament to your value, in terms of what you could actually produce. But you have these individuals that are just stuck in a spot where they're just masters of the bureaucracy of that little machine. If that machine never falls, they're done. Right? And it's just, again, it's not about finding an environment that isn't going to collapse. It's about every day continuing to invest in who you are. If you've gone through the Master the 24-Hour Cycle program, link in the description, it's free. Every day I follow a TRIM framework. Well, the TRIM framework, the I stands for improvement, which means every single day I am investing in improving some skill or education. Today, what did I do? Today, I had to go over my penmanship again. I went over, I'm going to bring it up right on my phone. I use this app called Brilliant. You guys ever hear of that app? Brilliant. And right now I'm working on some math program and it's not coming up, so I might not be able to use it. But basically the idea of it, the notion is there's not a day where I don't ask myself, how can I invest my time and energy in being a little bit more capable? How could I learn about something? I just messaged my wife before this asking if she could stop by the post office on the way back from the gym because I have a book waiting for me there. Like, it never stops. I have a school. I have a coaching program. I have, in coaching, I have my one-on-one clients. I have my my group, the Inner Circle, the 3 Roads group. I have a book that I sell. I have a shirt store that I sell customized shirts in, an online store, not a brick and mortar. But all these things, it's like, yeah, like if I was somebody that just rested on my laurels, I wouldn't have all of these things operational. But at this point, it's like, yeah, I could just chill all day and play Xbox and, just make sure these things stay afloat, stay open. But now what I'm doing is I'm just banking on the circumstances not changing. And it's just never been a way that I've conducted myself. And, and being somebody that's constantly investing and broadening their horizons and adding to their skill sets and their value is something that I advocate for. Whether or not in the moment you happen to be achieving success, that has nothing to do with it. You do it because it's a standard. You do it because it gives you the movement and the stimulation to constantly grow and become more resilient, more anti-fragile as an individual. You don't want to be the guy that, like the other day, our lights turned off, right? It's winter, it's a storm, everything going on. And we lost power for, I don't know, maybe 12 hours. It's like, as soon as the power went out, like, everybody in my house had things to do. It's not like there was no panic. There was no uncertainty. There was no, oh, what's going to happen? Or I wonder if it's going to be on, or let's all don't go anywhere in case, like, whenever we were in the city and there was ever a power outage, it started turning into like a fucking a dystopia. Like the minute by minute, everybody started losing, their mind because of the level of uncertainty that they're just not accustomed to having. Get out of the city, though. Get out of that artificially engineered environment, put somebody in nature, and they build a relationship with uncertainty because they know they're not in charge of everything. Right? What else is going on? Big Derek, what's going on, brother man? Mad Guardian says, worked for a gym chain. Once I doubled its income, I asked for a raise. Big mistake. I was let go soon after. Lesson, make a contract before you do more at work. Well, here's the thing. I have a story that I shared. It might have been on last week's show where I talked about being a personal trainer in a gym, and everybody in the gym was paying $80. I was only getting paid $30 out of the $80. And what I wound up doing was bringing all my people to their homes and told them that they would only have to pay $60. I'm changing the numbers, but the point of it's the same. They would only have to pay $60, and we'd do it at their house. And I gave them a break and wound up doubling my income. And maybe a month or two before me giving them that option, I started training everybody in workouts that could be done in their home. So it's not like they noticed now we don't have all this equipment. It's like, no, we weren't using it anyway. Because I understand that the gym, this corporate gym that I worked for at the time, they don't give a fuck about me. They don't give a fuck about what I'm supposed to do. So what I would say, Mad Guardian, to comment on that, it's like, good on you that you did your job effectively. But now it's about finding the opportunities to where that value actually becomes reciprocated, and if you did double the income of the gym and they let go of you, maybe that's not the people you want to be working for, because it doesn't sound too smart. I don't think I've ever fired anybody that doubled the income of what I hired them to do, so just a thought. All right. Corey says, ironically, these companies will become exactly what these unions were originally intended to fight against. Everything comes full circle. These companies are turning the tables on labor. Well, I'm always looking at it from the individual standpoint. And if you're in it, like, one of the things we all have to understand, not everyone's going to survive. Not everyone's going to make it. Holy fuck, man, this is a hard one to get. And there have been plenty of times in my life where I've suffered from overinvesting in relationships because, you wanted to you start rooting for them, right? And the idea of it is, if I'm not as strong as I can be, I am very limited in my ability to be valuable to somebody else. It's why it's so important to design alliances that have the target of that alliance understood right at its inception, especially in a professional sense. If I'm going to coach somebody, we're in that first conversation talking about what metrics we're looking to achieve, what the process is going to be, right? And my commitment is teaching them the process and getting them to this finish line. Their deal is they're going to invest in that training, but also they're agreeing that they're going to implement that process to achieve that finish line. We have a very tangible understanding of what the expectations of each other is right at the beginning. So then as we go on, it's basically just following the path that we established from the beginning. There are plenty of times where you guys have heard me say loyalty is an investment, not a debt. It's hard to say that I did this for you, therefore you owe me something. It's like, you need a contract if that is the position you want to take. But without that contract, you'd have to ask yourself, well, why did I do all these things? Now, it could be you did it because you were capable, because you had good intentions. And all that's fine, but you're going to run into a problem if you think that you did it because you expected some sort of reciprocation that was never codified and therefore not enforceable. I gave a talk, and if you guys join my free group, it's also down in the description, the Three Roads Tribe. There's a talk. What was the name of the talk? Was it Pace Invaders? It might have been Pace Invaders. And in this talk, I define what a loyal person is. Like you can have an individual who has exhibited loyalty before. You could have an individual that he is loyal to him. He is loyal to that. Like there could be these connections. But when we look at just the individual and say this individual is a loyal person, what I mean when I say that is that individual, by default, in order to be true to who they are to themselves, if somebody ever invests in them, they have a compulsion, internally driven, to reciprocate that investment. They don't want people to invest in them with not they in turn doing something for them. Those are what loyal people are. See, now the thing about loyal people is if they don't have the discipline to surround themselves with, they wind up creating alliances where they get burned time and time again. It's very hard for me to let people do things for me. One of the reasons it's so hard for me to let people do things for me is I also know that it's equally, if not more difficult for me to not then feel compelled to do something for them. And not that, hey, there's a debt that I don't want this guy thinking that, I owe him. Like, it's not that. It's really just the gratitude that somebody's going to invest anything in me and me wanting them to understand that I never felt entitled to what they did. So I have to be very careful about what I allow people to do for me right from the beginning, right? So it is, I would say, very, very productive to be a loyal individual. But the discipline that goes along with being a loyal individual is that we do not create alliances that wind up having us paying back bad investments, because what winds up happening is we wind up getting manipulated and owned and controlled by other people. It's like, hey, all I got to do is do this for him and he's going to be on the hook for paying me back. And I know it. So we have to be very careful about what help we receive. Hope that makes sense. All right, guys, let's end it there. I hit some stuff pretty hard there. It was pretty good. I think we had a pretty good go of it. If you guys have not subscribed to the email, what are you doing? It's free. Get on the email. I'm here every Wednesday. If you don't get the email, I'm here every Wednesday, noon Eastern Standard Time for about an hour. Free programs. Like there's a bunch of links in the description. Check it out. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, like, subscribe, all that stuff, which, it's like at this point, like hook a brother up. But I will be here next week. I appreciate you guys. You guys are as busy as I am. I understand that. Guys hanging out with me, don't think it doesn't go unnoticed. And I'm not grateful for it. But I am losing my voice. I will see you guys next week, same time. And all of you, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.